Okay, welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. Today's opinions will be about The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. So I have a lot of thoughts about this one, and I'm going to tell you right away, it's not because I disliked it. It's because this book is like 800 pages long. There's a lot of thoughts to be had here. So first of all, I will say this book was recommended to me by every single person I've ever met who's read fantasy. And part of the reason I had never read Wheel of Time before now is because I thought I had read one of the Wheel of Time books. I think I read another book that had Wheel and Time somewhere in the title, and so I thought I had started the series, and I was just sort of like, I mean, it's okay, it's nothing that interesting. So I just never went back to it. And then I realized when I was hearing about the Amazon series that no, that's not the book I read. So I decided to go ahead and give The Eye of the World a try. The Eye of the World is the first of the Wheel of Time series, and it is really epic fantasy in the purest form. Cat. So, like every genre in the known universe, there are a buttload of subgenres within fantasy, and a lot of them are very specific. But people tend to use epic fantasy as a generalized term for pretty much anything that's not urban fantasy. And it's not. Epic fantasy has some very specific tropes it lives within. And this book fits the subgenre like a fucking glove. We have three naive farm boys drawn into a quest to save the world from a pure evil villain. We've got the old badass magic wielder and the stoic older fighter. We have the chosen one destined to be a hero shit going on. It's a true epic fantasy. Rand, Matt, and Perrin are our main characters. They are three young men from a quiet village in the middle of nowhere, living a peaceful life when evil monsters called Trollocs attack their town. Ooh. There is a woman in town named Moraine who tells them that the Trollocs were there searching for them. She is an Aes Sedai, which I am definitely mispronouncing that. There is a pronunciation in the glossary, and I am still mispronouncing it. But they're basically wizards. Was traveling through the area with her warden, which is basically her bodyguard fighter type guy named Lan, and she tells them that these boys, these three guys, are being tracked by the Dark One, basically Satan in this world. And he wants them. So the only way to protect the boys and protect the village is to get them out of town and for them to follow her across the country to Tar Valon, which is the city of the wizards. With them go a village girl who wants desperately to get out and explore the world named Edwin, a gleeman, which is basically a bard, named Tom, and a village wisdom, who is basically the town witch, named Nynaeve. They end up traveling with them, even though Moraine at the beginning is like, no, I don't think this is a good idea. But she very quickly decides that they are part of the pattern of destiny that is forming around these three boys. Now, in true epic fantasy fashion, the group stumble into all sorts of dangers. They are chased by evil, they separate, individual members of the party find their own destinies along the way, and then they come together in time to face the fight they were destined to have. So I'm going to start by saying this book has so many of the fantasy tropes that I sort of hate. First, there's the trope that the world is just so dark you can't trust anyone. Don't get me wrong, I love myself a dark world, or at least a world where dark things happen. Hell, I've written quite a few books with dark worlds and worlds where people are not trustworthy. But overall, I personally believe that human beings are at their core not actively evil. Passively? Yeah, probably. Like, I do think most people will stand back and let bad shit happen as long as they don't have to feel at fault themselves. But the whole anyone would sell their neighbor to Satan for a pancake kind of worldview is not one that I share. And for at least, I'd say the first 400 pages of this book, it feels like that's the world we're in. Like, everyone seems to be either trying to swindle, cheat, or downright kill the people around them. Dark Friends are a major antagonist in the book, and Dark Friends are basically people who have sold their soul to Satan, and they appear at random, but more importantly, every single person that the main characters meet, people are afraid of, like, is that a dark friend? Are they a dark friend? Could, like, the people in our party be dark friends? Oh my god, dark friends everywhere! But there's also, on the other side of that, the White Cloaks, which are basically a militaristic cult that was formed to hunt down and get rid of dark friends. I think they are an army of one of the nations. I don't know. It's very complicated world. But the White Cloaks, there are times they don't feel so much like a fantasy world version of European 17th century witchfinders as much as a parody of them. Like, sometimes it gets really extreme. And, like, sometimes there's reasons for them to believe that, oh, dark friends are probably involved in this, because look, magic, and magic in this world is seen as terrifying and evil. But there are other times that literally, like, just someone walks by and they're like, dark friends! And I'm like, dude, calm down. But then we meet some of the White Cloaks as actual characters, and they become a lot more intriguing and interesting, and, like, maybe they actually are more realistic. But I don't know, because they're a very small passing part of the book. But on top of that, there's a constant fear that anyone around them could be dark friends, could be White Cloaks, or could be from the Red and Black Aja, which are basically political factions, basically, within the Wizards. And the Red Aja believe in, like, getting rid of all, like, non-acceptable magic, and the Black are evil. So, like, there's constant fear that anyone could be any of these bad people. But also, everyone we meet is suspicious of our heroes for a while, and you're just sort of like, oh my god, nobody trusts anyone in this world. Until the group separates, and they are forced to rely on strangers. Robert Jordan never makes a big deal about this, but we gradually start seeing more and more good, trusting people counterbalancing the evil, distrustful ones. I found myself liking everything a lot more when we started meeting these real, human-feeling people. One of my favorite characters in the book is actually this random farmer who gives Rand and Matt a ride at one point. He has no reason to trust them. Hell, he has a pretty good reason not to trust them. But he shows them kindness, helps them at risk to himself, and basically the only downside of him is he talks too much. But that leads me to another one of my least favorite tropes. Characters who keep shit from the one person who can actually help them, out of fear that that person is untrustworthy. But so, like, the boys follow Moraine out of town. They abandon their lives to do what she says is the best thing to do. They understand she is the only one who can protect them, and in so doing, protect their families. And they mostly seem to accept this, even though they make passing references of, like, maybe we should just run off. It always seems very much, like, not sincere, that they're just mentioning it in passing. And yet they still refuse to tell her about their dreams, when she specifically asked them to and told them it could be really important. And it just didn't feel earned to me. Like, their continuing distrust for her throughout the entire book doesn't feel earned to me. And honestly, none of the distrust for the Aes Sedai feels earned to me. Because it seems to be an accepted fact in this world, and it's, like, set up in the prologue so that we know it, that it's the men wizards who broke the world. But the women did not. Like, it seems that the women were the ones fighting for the good. And since then, we don't hear anything about the women wizards doing anything bad except for gentling, which is when the Aes Sedai basically use their powers to push down the boys' powers, so if male wizards appear, they won't go mad and destroy shit, because it seems that's part of the nature of men wizards in this world. But while gentling is not presented as a pleasant experience, everyone in this world sees male wizards as inherently terrifying bad things. So wouldn't the female wizards getting rid of them be seen as a good thing? So overall, I'm not sure I entirely buy everyone's continued distrust of them. And, like, I'm assuming later novels will show us more of, like, the reasons that people distrust them. But as is, we meet two in the entire book, one of whom is basically the Gandalf of the entire book, and the other one who we get creepy vibes off of, but she doesn't actually do anything that bad. Overall, I feel like I'm not sure I buy the emotional response of the general population, nor of our characters within the general population. I still don't buy why they don't trust Moraine by the end of the book. Also, the 3 male leads are just so aggressively teenage boyish. They make decisions that would make Merry and Pippin from Lord of the Rings look like wise old men. They constantly worry about not understanding girls. And there's this running gag throughout the entire book that Perrin thinks Rand is better at understanding girls, and Rand thinks that Perrin is better at understanding girls. And it gets overdone really quickly. Especially considering we never see anything from either of them that explains why Rand thinks Perrin is better with girls and Perrin thinks Rand is better with girls. Like, it's never explained. It's just referenced, like, 5 times. And it was really funny the first time. There's also a surprisingly large amount of us being told things about characters without being shown it. So, like, we have Rand and Edwin from the very beginning are childhood sweethearts who are clearly in love with each other. But we don't actually see them acting in any way coupley or see them acting in any way really in love with each other. It's not until, like, the last 50 pages that we really see them, like, obviously showing that they care about each other. Similarly, we're told that Matt is the troublemaking prankster, but the only things we actually see are him make a couple of snide comments along the way, and we're told at the beginning that he's captured a badger and plans to release it in town square. I think that was also a really big problem with Matt, because we never get a passage from his point of view. And his character ends up being corrupted for a good portion of the book. So we just keep hearing other characters, and mostly just Rand, thinking, Matt's not acting like himself. That's not the usual Matt. But we sort of don't know who Matt is yet. Similarly, the other romance in the book is a bit underdeveloped. Though weirdly, it's, in my opinion, slightly better developed. But here's the thing. Honestly, underdevelopment of especially romantic elements is just a side effect of high epic fantasy. The genre does not do deep romance. I mean, think of Lord of the Rings. The only real romance is basically just Tolkien telling us that these 2 random women are in love with Aragorn. But that's sort of how romance works in high epic fantasy. All you have to do is say the characters are in love with each other, and you sort of accept that they are. Because high epic fantasy is about getting through a buttload of events, not so much getting to know characters' souls. Epic fantasy is often told from a rather distant perspective, like you're standing behind the character's shoulder and occasionally hearing them comment on events instead of being inside their head. And that just means you tend to lack an intimate understanding of the characters that you'd get from other genres. And that's made up for by the fact that epic fantasy is long as fuck. So you got plenty of time to get to know the characters through their actions. And yeah, this is one of those books that it does that. In the beginning, we're just told who the characters are and you sort of just gotta accept it. But by the end, you mostly start to see that. With, as mentioned, the exception of Matt, because Matt's not himself for, like, you know, probably about this chunk of the book. But that did mean I really appreciated the moments where we got to see things from different characters' POVs. When they get separated, we spend a little bit of time in Nynaeve's point of view and a little bit of time in Perrin's point of view, and I was so happy for that. Especially because Perrin is a character who does not talk much, and until his point of view section, I sort of had no idea who the hell he was. And after those sections, he was by far my favorite of the 3 male characters. Now, having spent basically 2 pages bitching about this book, I will say, I really liked it. The world building is where this book really stands out. It's just familiar enough that the novel interesting bits really stand out to you. The lore is immensely complex. There's a millennia of history built into the backstory here, which makes the world feel very full. And it's mostly introduced in such a way that you don't feel overwhelmed, but also, importantly, there's a glossary in the back. I love books with a glossary, and this one is a necessary glossary. There are times that I was referencing it trying to figure out what's going on. I don't remember what this particular item or person was. And, like, I just read over 800 pages in this world, and yet there's still a lot more of it to explore. And a lot of the basic world building here is classic epic fantasy. It's based in a pseudo-European, medieval-ish kind of society, but where Jordan's world building really stands out is just in its specificity. Like, it's not like these are unusual bits of lore. Gleemen are basically just bards, but not magic bards, just like singing bards. Trollocs are basically just orcs. Wisdoms are sort of just the normal village witch. The Aes Sedai are just wizards. The Dark One is the Dark Lord that appears in every epic fantasy ever. He's just Satan. It's just that simple. Hell, he's even called basically a name that it sounds exactly like Satan. So, it's not that he's doing something completely unheard of, but they were so specifically drawn that they felt new and exciting. A lot of fantasy novels, it's pretty clear that the author knows exactly the amount about their world necessary to tell the story, and no more. But not this book. It felt like every village they passed through had its own culture, and you could see how the cultures connected to the village next door. There are a couple moments where Rand notices that while the language the villagers are speaking is the same one they spoke at home, but the accent has subtly shifted as they move away from home so that he's having trouble understanding them. And that's the kind of accurate, specific world building that I suspect is the reason people love Robert Jordan. Though this is also a very highly gendered world. Everything from village councils being separated between men's councils in charge of all the men's affairs and women's councils in charge of all the women's affairs, to the very core of magic being divided between a male half and a female half. And I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. The women's roles in this world are not weak ones. The only people still allowed to be wizards are women. There are women warriors, and the women's council is shown as just as powerful as the men's. But still, it's segregated. Our three main boy characters fight several fights with sword, bow, and axe. The girls just run. I think it's mentioned at one point that they both have daggers, but it's mentioned specifically as Rand thinking he needed to protect them because those daggers weren't enough to fight off Trollocs. Now, both of the girls are going to learn magic, and our badass wizard who spends most of the book saving everybody else's butt is a woman, but I'm still not sure how I feel about just how gendered it is. I guess I'm going to reserve judgment on that until I read a bit more of the series. I was also incredibly worried throughout, like, the last probably 150 pages about the climax of the book. I kept looking at the number of pages left and being like, there's not enough room left for us to have a good, fulfilling ending. And to a certain extent, I was right. This is an 800-page book with a climax that's less than 20 pages. Two of the main boys aren't involved in the climax at all. Nynaeve is knocked out immediately, and Edwin is prevented from fighting by Rand. There is enough foreshadowing that we already know the surprise reveal before it actually happens, or at least I'm assuming that everyone reading this knows by the time we get there who Rand is going to be. Like, this is not a big reveal. The fight goes by in the blink of an eye, with very little actual physical action. And I mean, that is fine. A high fantasy novel does not need an epic battle at the end. And it helps that this is undeniably the first of a series. So the first of a series, the ending just really needs to feel like a waypoint, not so much a solid note ending. And I know this is completely unimportant, but the maps in this book were infuriating to me. First of all, they weren't in the right place in the book. There are 2 maps at the beginning, but not the beginning. No, they're after the prologue. So you have to flip through the prologue to get to the actual map. And the map, we have a close-up and a further away map, which, I mean, convenient, useful, but the next map is like 400 pages in. I don't even know where it is anymore. And like, I get that they were trying to put the maps where they needed to be for, like, when we get to that section of the world, but the problem is, the second map is about 100 pages early. So I kept going, are we on this map yet? I'm trying to find us on this map. We're not on this map. And also, the scale is just wrong. Like, I'm sorry, the scale is wrong here. Like, the amount of time it took them to get from here to here is like 3 days. But then, the amount of time it takes for them to get here to here is like a week? And I'm like, that does not math. I'm sorry, it really doesn't. And also, like, major places that appear in the book are not on the map. And, like, there's one that makes sense because it moves, so how the hell would it be on the map? But the other one? No, it should be on the damn map. And on top of that, the last map shifts orientation. We went from north being this way to north being that way. And that's just fucking confusing. I spent, like probably 20 minutes looking at this map going, did the blight move? How did the blight move? Why did the blight move? Am I confused? Before I finally realized that it was just facing a different direction. And I know this is not something I should obsess over, but don't put a map in a book and then have it be wrong. It will really bother me. Again, after that little freak out about maps, I do have to tell you, I did love this book. And the longer it's been since I finished it, the more I've liked it. The characters really grew on me. In fact, some of them started as honestly slightly annoying, but they grew up in a believable manner throughout the course of the book, and also you got to know them a bit better. As I mentioned, epic fantasy tends to do this. They start out as stock characters, and you slowly learn who they are from seeing their actions. The story is objectively a great adventure. There's enough stuff happening constantly that it kept the pages turning for me, but it's not so much that it feels rushed until we get to the end. But the world is really fascinating, and many of my complaints are sort of complaints inherent to the nature of the way that high epic fantasy exists. It's just the way the genre works. So overall, I would say that if you like Lord of the Rings, if you like the Belgariad, if you like Sword of Truth and other high epic fantasies, you'll probably love this book. But for myself, I sort of got to read more to decide whether I absolutely loved it or just liked it.